This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. I'm Angela Enriquez from SloCat, and I will be moderating today's webinar. So the objective of today's webinar is to inform practitioners from the transport sector, as well as other sectors, policymakers, and people in sustainable development and climate change sector about global, regional, and transport sector trends. Before we start, I would like to ask everyone to please stay muted throughout the webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat box and we'll be sure to answer them. So also to highlight that we are focusing on our report, which is a Transport and Climate Change Global Status Report that can be downloaded at slocat.net/TCC-GSR. So first, we'll start off with an introduction by Sophia, and then go into the global overview. And then I will go ahead and present the transport demand emissions and mitigation pathways. And finally, we'll end the webinar with a question and answer session. So I'll go ahead and introduce Sophia. Sophia works for GIZ for the Changing Transport Project, where all climate-related transport activities of GIZ are hosted. She has been supporting transfer and the sector project, sustainable mobility in communications, public relations, project and event management, and cooperation with international partners. Sophia?
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for having me. Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thank you for having me. A warm welcome from my side to everyone who joined the webinar too. Yes, so I'm in the Changing Transport project engaged, where we have all projects related with transport and climate hosted. So I'll give a head start on why actually we introduced the Global Status Report, or how it came to the idea of publishing such a report or implementing such a report. And so please go on to my first slide.
I know it's a pain, but if it's an all-day vibration, maybe you can go use Wilfredo's office or something until.
I think so
because they're working upstairs.
I know you don't.
This has been since they've been doing the remodel.
Could you kindly mute your? Thank you. So actually, the target group that we had are or have in mind with the Global Status Report are policymakers and technical experts all around the world. And what we want to achieve with the Global Status Report is that it will become the new one-stop shop to go to, and a new central knowledge base, so to say, for trends, challenges, solutions, policy instruments used in the peer groups, for you to raise ambition and to have a better argument basis on all those issues in transport and climate change. Because with this Global Status Report, we have for the first time and from now on a regular basis, all relevant information gathered in one place, and therefore it can function as a key resource for policymakers to raise awareness awareness and to enable all the stakeholders to increase their ambitions and as well ambitious decisions towards decarbonizing transport. And it's also a good basis to check progress on transport and mitigation or adaptation, and to enable also increased action on transport and climate change. And how actually we want to do that is in the global status report, we provide valuable information on the development of global transport demand and also CO2 emissions from the transport sector and its relevant subsectors. And also in the global status report, we offer a lot of trends and analysis on central issues such as financing for low carbon transport, and we provide policy examples from the Avoid, Shift, Improve framework. And the background actually is also to for meeting the Paris Agreement and the 1.5 degree target, we realized that it requires substantive, of course, action on transport. And for this, it's important to know where we stand right now. And by better being able to track current efforts of the global transport community, this is actually the background, and we bring together various information streams on transport and climate change from now on in a regular and actionable report. So I really hope that it's going to be the new one-stop shop and a central knowledge base, as I said, for you as policymakers and technical experts, as, so to say, an argument basis. Yes, could you kindly go on to my next slide? And so actually it's a brilliant start, as I would say, in which many committed colleagues have invested a lot of times. You see here some numbers and data, how many people were involved or in the contribution of this global status report. So we have data illustrating from 1970 until 2017, and we do also have projections in there until 2050. And the results of collective efforts leveraging the SloCat partnership, we have in there 23 authors and 51 contributors who contributed to the global status report, and even 51 people reviewed it from all in all 34 organizations. And as you see there, also the global assessment was made with 180 policy examples from over 70 countries. So you see it's a very ambitious report, also with a lot of information in there covering national and subnational levels. And we have in there also 67 key indicators for 8 policy landscapes. And also 60 figures with rich data sets and a lot of graphics to have hands-on information and really easily accessible information gathered in our report. Yes, and who contributed actually to this GSR all in all? So we had the authors and persons there listed, but actually who stands behind it? The TCC-GSR report was primarily supported, as you see, by us within GIZ and SloCat, who brought the idea to life. And there a really warm and special thanks to SloCat for the tremendous work and passion your team has put into the report. And we had some really valuable financial support also from the Havlet Foundation, Hewlett, and the Ford Foundation. And our primary supporter also, and we are very grateful to them, is the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety. Without whom actually the report would not have come alive, because BMU, as they are called short, supported strongly the idea from the very beginning as one of the main funders. And then, as you see, also we have a lot of main contributors contributing to the strategy team of the report, and there a special thanks also, or definitely goes to REN21, because they were actually the idea giver for this, and they also provided a review platform, so they made a huge contribution to the report as a special advisor within the strategy team. And they were also a section author. And actually, as maybe you know, that REN21 since 10 years already was publishing the renewable energy report, renewable energy global status report, so to say. And there actually we picked up this idea of the global renewable energy report to also have this new one-stop shop for transport and climate change development. Yes. So, and actually now that the flagship report for the sustainable low carbon transport community, as I would say, is everyone in this webinar here, is out, we are also already thinking about the next edition of the report, because as I said, it shall be from now on a report published on a regular basis to track progress. And therefore the second edition, within the second edition, we really want to continue to support SloCat as GIZ, especially with the following elements. We really want to establish a new international network of data providers that provide first-hand data from the countries. And so therefore we want to broaden the scope of the report also in regard to policy measures and financing. Thus we want to improve the peer-to-peer information in the 8 subject areas, which you will hear about in short time. And therefore, we invite everyone today also who joined the webinar and all interested parties to approach SloCat to become part of the next edition. And we look for your participation from you and your peers in related fields, such as provide quantitative or qualitative data or peer review draft sections to shape the next edition, or even to support our outreach. And therefore, I kindly ask you to write your ideas how you can become part of the next edition of the Global Status Report, or how you can contribute to it to the email address as you see it here, TCC-GSR@slocatpartnership.org. Yes, that was my contribution to the Global Status Report, and I really think it was a brilliant start of our new one-stop shop and central knowledge base from now on for US policymakers and technical experts to raise ambition on transport actions to mitigate climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you. Okay. And now I will go ahead and introduce Nicola Medjamorek, who is the senior researcher at SloCat, and he supports the research on and data collection on various topics related to sustainable transport and climate change. And Nicola is going to start diving into the details within the report. So Nicola?
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. Can you go please to the next slide? So first, to briefly introduce actually our organization, the Partnership on Sustainable Low Carbon Transport, or SloCat in short. We are a multi-stakeholder organization with over 90 members, and our members are very diverse. They've come from the other international organizations, the development banks, NGOs, and even private companies, and up to think tanks, research institutes, and everything that falls under academia. And our main mission of SloCat, of the SloCat partnership, is to promote and to integrate sustainable transport in global discussions on sustainable development and climate action, and also to raise the ambition and to leverage knowledge, action in support of the implementation of transport in the global policies on sustainable development and climate change. And next slide, please. So, as Sophia introduced the report and also named it this flagship report really well. So thank you very much for this. And now, to a little bit dive into the report, I first want to show you the overall structure of how the report looks like and how it was formed. It consists of 4 major parts. The first part is about the key findings and the global overview, where you can find summaries of activities of major regions, for example, like transport demand, transport emission and policy measure information for 5 major regions. And then the global overview looks at passenger and freight, as well as the development in these areas. Then the second part of the report goes into the sector-specific demands of transport, and then also the emissions, looking at past, current, as well as the future emission pathways that will happen or that are projected in terms of business as usual, and also low carbon pathway. The third part of the report then looks at measures, low carbon transport measures. What can be done to introduce low carbon or sustainable transport more widely? And it's divided within 8 major areas that I will also a little bit touch upon a little bit later. And then the last part is about financing and also giving an overview of stakeholders, organizations, initiatives that actually tried also to scale up and to implement sustainable transport. And also part 3 and part 4 will be then covered in depth in the next webinar, in the follow-up webinar that we plan at the end of May. Please, next slide. So here you can see that's the part 1, the global overview chapter, where we look at all major regions, passenger and freight transport, as well as international aviation and shipping. Please, next slide. So here, transport emissions are significant. They contribute around 7.5 gigatons of CO2 to overall greenhouse gas emissions, and represent or are accounting for 28% of global final energy demand. And here the figure shows like 14% of economy-wide emissions are produced by transport, or if you look at the global energy-related CO2 emissions, then we are at 23%. It's very important to see that transport CO2 emissions are at an all-time high, and they're still increasing. From 2000 until 2016, transport CO2 emissions increased by 29%, and they continue to grow in many major regions of many major economies around the world. The figure also shows that actually road transport, so like light-duty vehicles, trucks, buses, and 2- and 3-wheelers account for roughly 75%, so 3/4 of transport emissions. So a significant contribution of transport emissions comes currently from road transport. Yep, please, next slide. And then analyzing regarding the looking at the regions and major regions, how they grew in recent years, you can identify that Asia has become the largest pollution emitter in terms of transport CO2 emissions, and also it had the fastest growth from 2000 to 2016 with 92%, followed by Africa and Latin America. But also, as you can see in this figure very well, Africa and Latin America, they come from much lower baselines, and but still there's rapidly increasing transport CO2 emissions. So Asia overtook Europe and also overtook North America in terms of the region with the biggest share of transport CO2 emissions. Oh, sorry. And then also, of course, you can also look at OECD countries. And then if you look at OECD countries, well, like OECD and non-OECD, then you see that major growth has been happening in non-OECD countries over OECD countries. Yeah, and then please, the next slide. So then in the global overview, we try to outline and visualize the motorized passenger transport demand. So like the travel activity for passenger vehicles. And as you can see, we looked at the year 2000 and 2015 for the global level for OECD and non-OECD countries. Here, the most significant and most like striking developments are, for example, for non-OECD countries, you can see a strong increase in light-duty vehicles, as well as also strong increase in aviation. And then, while also bus usage, or like the share of buses in terms of transport demand, overall decreased. For OECD, light-duty vehicles or like cars stayed more or less at a similar, little bit decreasing share, but then aviation also like still grew very, very strongly. So overall, like this key message of this figure is that the modal share shifts rapidly towards private cars and air travel, and we see a decrease of public transport. Yeah, please, next slide. Thank you. And now looking at freight, which is also very important because you have to be clear, like around 59% of emissions come from passenger, but then 41% of emissions come from freight. And here, a very important pattern or trend for freight is more stronger increase of road freight. So more trucks and more goods and deliveries are being done with road vehicles, and that's very significant also in terms of emissions, as the emissions per ton kilometers are much higher for trucks than you would have for shipping or for other modes. And yes, so also for example, while passenger transport emissions have only increased by 36% from 2015, for freight they increased by 75%. So also soon, and if this continues, then also the share of emissions produced by freight will be almost equally as high as for passenger transport. Yeah, and then please next slide. So throughout the whole TCC-GSR, we try to promote and try to structure major policy responses or landscape sections along the framework of avoid, shift, and improve. This is a very holistic, comprehensive, and also like well-established tool or framework in the sustainable transport sector, which more or less stands for avoiding the need or avoiding motorized travel, then shifting to more environmentally friendly modes, and improving energy efficiency of current transport modes. At the bottom, you can see 8 major areas of sustainable transport, which we also call policy landscapes in the TCC-GSR report. And in part 3 of the report, then we go into detail about what these major areas are, what progress has been made in implementing them around the world. So we have like certain set of indicators for them, and then also we try to outline or to indicate the amount of emission reductions or emission savings or modal shifts towards more environmentally friendly modes possible through implementing these measures. But yes, as I said before, we will cover this in a follow-up webinar at the end of next month. Now back to Angela to introduce the second part of the GSR.
Thank you, Nicola, for starting off with providing more detail of what you can find for the first part of the report. I will be introducing some of the findings from the second part of our report, which covers transport demand, emissions, and mitigation pathways. So findings in the report confirm that transport demand was driven by external factors such as population and GDP. These drivers are closely interlinked with the growth of energy consumption, oil usage, and CO2 emissions from the sector. GDP has been the strongest driver of transport demand in the last 2 decades, with a 58% increase between 2000 and 2017. Now, global population has increased by 1.5 billion since 2000, with 82% growth concentrated in low and middle income countries. So this sort of links into what Nicola presented, with there being the major growth in Asia and Africa, and the data shows that they are interlinked with population growth and transport emissions. So the growth in population and GDP has an impact not only on transport demand, but also changes the way that people travel. And Nicola has also touched on this. While OECD countries have remained highly motorized, and over 62% of passenger activity occurred in private vehicles, in non-OECD countries, buses are still the most dominant mode for passenger transport. However, the data shows that there's a strong shift toward private motorization in non-OECD countries. This trend has led to an increase in the number of vehicles on the road. From 2000 to 2015, 97% of global surface transport infrastructure investments were made to pave roads. 90% of these investments occurred in non-OECD countries. Now, investments in low carbon transport infrastructure are growing as well. In the first graph, you can see that bus rapid transit has been a fast growing option for low carbon transport investment between 2000 and 2017. In that same period, investments in high-speed rail grew 722%, with the majority of these investments being made in China. In the graph to the right, you can see that there was growth in light rail and metro projects. For example, in 2017, 26 cities in 11 countries added over 700 kilometers of metro, and 17 cities added 135 kilometers of light rail. The baseline value of these investments was still lower than the amount that was invested in roads and conventional rail, though. And just to highlight that the picture on the left shows the new LRT system that was implemented in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia in 2015. Now that we have an understanding on the demands and investment priorities in the sector, it's important for us to point out why we need to look at the transport sector for its mitigation potential. And this is because transport had the second strongest growth in CO2 emissions between 1970 and 2016. So globally, the annual growth of transport CO2 emissions is currently at about 1.6% per year. However, many countries are rapidly developing in Asia and Africa, as Nicola had pointed out, and these emission growth rates are exceeding 5% per year. Now, in these countries, as with most other countries, the growth is in road transport. Road transport accounts for about 75% of all transport emissions. This slide shows the percentage share of transport CO2 emissions by mode. The report found that passenger transport emissions increased by 36% between 2000 to 2015, and this was led by light-duty vehicles and aviation. Freight transport emissions have increased by 75%, led by trucks. Now, the emission share of freight increased from 35% in 2000 to 41% in 2015. As is being highlighted in the slide, freight transport emissions are increasing faster than passenger transport. Trips taken in OECD countries have remained fairly consistent, with a minor increase in the use of trucks. Non-OECD countries have shifted to using light-duty vehicles and 2 to 3 wheelers more. And these trends show the highest growth amongst the least sustainable modes of transport. Now, some have made the argument that they cannot implement low carbon solutions without having a negative impact on economic development. Now, this graph illustrates the GDP and transport emission trends from 1990 to 2016. The data shows that there's signs of divergence, or in other words, decoupling. This shows that countries are able to increase their GDP while also curbing emissions from the sector. So that's very good news for us working on transport, sustainable transport. The less than good news is that we still have a lot of work to do. If the sector continues with these trends, the business as usual pathways, it is projected that the sector could produce up to 18 gigatons of CO2 by 2050. Now, for transport to contribute to the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal of the Paris Agreement, CO2 emissions from the sector have to go down to 2 gigatons of CO2 by 2050. To do this, we need to use every tool in our belt, especially within the Avoid, Shift, and Improve framework. It's important to highlight also that the success of an economy-wide energy transition will rely on decarbonization of the transport sector. Now, nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, are documents where countries outline and communicate their post-2020 climate actions and provide information on countries' mitigation and adaptation priorities. Now, findings show that of the NDCs that mention transport, 11% of these measures were avoid, 23% were shift, and 66% of them were improved. Now, this data shows that countries prefer improved measures, but they also might be missing out on opportunities and the mitigation potentials provided by avoid and shift measures. It's important to understand that the mitigation potential within the entire system and not just focus on improved measures. The report highlights the potential of bundling these strategies within the avoid, shift, improve framework. So again, not just focusing on piecemeal implementation of mitigation strategies, but bundling all of them within the framework. And among the subsectors, various studies indicate mitigation potential is proportionate to the size of the sector, with the road sector providing the largest magnitude of potential mitigation. Decarbonizing freight transport is considered more challenging than passenger transport. However, mitigation potential for passenger and freight show similar bandwidth. So again, this is just a little bit of what we have within the Transport and Climate Change Global Status Report, which is very extensive. And we have another webinar coming up focusing on the policy landscape section that will give more specific examples of low carbon transport actions for the different transport subsectors. So now we'll go ahead and start with the question and answer session. And if you haven't already, please feel free to type in your questions in the chat box. Okay, so let's start. We have a first question here. One of the attendees is asking if the report covers the potential of hydrogen fuel electric vehicles and its subsequent impact on reducing GHG emissions. So I'll go ahead and give this to Nicola.
Yeah, thank you very much. So in general, in part 3, we have the section on renewable energy in transport, and there we cover all alternative fuels, biofuels, and also we touch on hydrogen. There's no dedicated indicator on hydrogen, and also because it's primarily a status report, so we don't really cover any projections or any quantifications of how much, or of the potential of how much a hydrogen fueled vehicle can save in comparison to like normal conventional diesel or gasoline vehicle. We nevertheless in the report we have lots of, not lots, but a couple of examples on hydrogen. For example, in Austria, there's some subsidies for hydrogen powered vehicles, or there's in Germany there's an energy plant that produces hydrogen with at the lowest, very low carbon footprint. And then also probably the most prominent and most kind of well-known example is a train by Alstom that was running into like this commercially running now in Lower Saxony in Germany as a regional train. And this train is it's a hydrogen train, and this energy of this hydrogen is completely produced by renewable energy sources, and it's also like labeled as completely carbon free because it comes from completely clean resources.
So I have a question here for Sophia. How can the TCC-GSR be used as an advocacy tool?
Yeah, thanks, Angela. Actually, it's a lot of the work that we do within the climate and transport project within GIZ is about advocacy for low carbon transport, and to do so and to communicate that this is really a relevant topic and that we need to work on this a lot more. A really strong database is a really valuable tool. And you really to communicate what the goals that we want to achieve and the projects that we want to do. You really need some hard facts, and you need a good background of data as arguments. And to give you one example, we also do social media communication, and there we see that graphics such as the ones that you show, which really pointed out data and facts information, and even done in such a nice format and with lovely colors. It's a really great argument, and those graphics spread really widely. And this is actually the advocacy work that we do. We want to increase the ambition on those transport actions, and even the awareness that those topics are so relevant in our today's world, and that we really need to do more in this field. And therefore graphics such as the ones that you showed are really a nice and important tool to spread the word about that.
Yeah. Okay, and so for our next question, we have here, and it's about assessing resilience within the report. How can we create resilient infrastructure, especially for those communities vulnerable to sea level rise risk? And I will give that to Nicola to answer how these were touched on within the report.
Yeah, thank you very much. So within the TCC-GSR, the Transport Climate Change Global Status Report, we have a box on the climate impacts and vulnerability in the transport sector, where we touch upon this topic and also try to emphasize first of all, we a little bit outline the climate impacts in the transport sector, and of course what you mentioned here, the sea level rise is one of the major risks for infrastructure, and especially for road transport infrastructure. And then there's also a few paragraphs on resilient transport, where we make very clear that there should be more, that because once you build transport infrastructure, or once you invest into transport infrastructure, it usually it stays there, or is being built there up for 10 to 15 years or even longer. And so climate factors and this climate risk has to be incorporated into these long-term decisions and long-term planning about transport infrastructure. And it's very important to look at all this kind of climate change impacts that can happen, and try to be more holistic about not only the impact of transport, but also what kind of impact the environment will have on the transport infrastructure, and how this will maybe change also in the coming decades with the global temperature increase and other more extreme weather events and so on. So that's also covered in the TCC-GSR, and also we identify there's a lot, in general, there's a lot of less attention on adaptation for transport than, for example, for mitigation. Transport is always regarded as a great source for reducing emissions, but then few climate action plans or few national adaptation plans then also look at transport and how transport has to contribute or has to adapt to the changing climate.
So for our next question, we have the report analyzed the sector from the perspective of NDCS agreement. And I can quickly respond and say that yes, there are sections focusing on NDCs and their plan, and we do not just within the out by different subsectors or based on mitigation and resilience for countries. So we do have sections within the report focusing on NDCs. And then I guess for this next questions, we have had comments from some countries, and we wanted to note that it would be great if you could provide your input and information to us, and we'd love to hear from you on how we can include some of your cases within the next iteration of the TCC-GSR. So note that we have your information on here, but please also reach out to us if you would like some of your examples included within the next iteration of the report. So it's from Nigeria, Serbia, and Benin. So please, again, reach out to us. All right. And we're very excited to see more representation from many regions. And then, so we have one question or one comment here about how the report makes good use of the Avoid, Shift, Improve framework, but transport is about more than just infrastructure and vehicles. I think that it is useful to expand the analysis to differentiate between transport, mobility, and accessibility. These areas actually map well to avoid transport, shift mobility, improve accessibility. Any thoughts on incorporating this into further versions of the report? So a lot of this information is already covered under the transport demand management section in the current report, and this will be covered in the next webinar that will be happening on May 30th. But then again, very interesting concept. So if you would like to provide more information or more thoughts on this, and it could be expanded into further versions of the report, please feel free to reach out to us. And again, our email is tcc-gsr@slocatpartnership.org. Okay, so we have about 7 more minutes. I don't know if there's any other questions or comments.
And there this from Christine Bindal. Sorry if I pronounced it wrongly, but two questions about short-lived climate pollutants considered for short-term mitigation strategies, and then also the second question: do you consider possible trade-offs between climate and air quality in evaluating the effectiveness of policies? And these are very interesting questions, and thank you very much for these. The report very briefly touches on short-lived climate pollutants, and also says, of course, it's not only CO2. There's other greenhouse gas emissions and other short-lived climate pollutants that are very dangerous and having very strong impact on global warming, on climate change. And yes, of course, these are very important to consider as part of mitigation measures. And the second question, yes, I completely. So I agreed to this trade-off between climate and air quality, but then also I it's not really that you have to decide between one of these two. So what I want to say, like climate change, climate action in transport will have also strong and good co-benefits for air pollution, for health, and for many other areas. So any introduction of let's say, to be very, very, very specific, any introduction of a BRT system or metro system, for example, will reduce, of course, the transport CO2 emissions, but it will also like improve the overall air quality of the city, and also hopefully it can also like activate more, people walking and cycling to public transport and using it then from there on. Yeah. So it's not. I understand like there's certain trade-offs, but we try to more highlight the co-benefits and the mutual benefits of climate action in transport.
And it's also important for us to highlight that SloCat and the TCC-GSR doesn't take any positions on the right solutions for the various regions, but we seek to give peer examples from all regions and show mitigation solutions exist for the different country contexts. So we just wanted to highlight that as well. And I guess there's another question here about having access to data sets. This specific question was asking about 2 to 3 wheelers, but in general, we do have data accessible. And so Nicola, if you can give the audience some more information about the data sets that are available.
So we work for the TCC-GSR, we worked a lot with like global data sets, and as you can see, a lot of them are on emissions or on transport activity. But besides that, we also try to and like motorization rate, like this very general, very the usual suspects in terms of data for transport. But then also beyond that, we try then to go into these specific landscape sections, like these major areas of action or measures, and we developed certain key indicators for each of the 8 sections, where we look at the current status, the current progress in implementing these measures in all countries around the world, as well as so-called market development indicators, where we look at how is then the overall transport situation evolving around these major areas. And so it's very indicator-rich report, and you will find, especially if you also join our next webinar, there you will find lots more examples of indicators of certain progress in certain areas, and also a lot more country-specific examples for certain measures.
Thank you, Nicola. And also to highlight that SloCat has this transport knowledge database called Track B, and you can find data on transport and NDCs and the voluntary national reviews, which are the VNRs, and climate finance instrument products. So we do have another data set that's available, and this information we can also share with the participants in our follow-up email to this. So we're always looking for contributors to the knowledge database. So please feel free, again, to reach out to us and let us know if you would like to be a contributor to the Track knowledge database. Now for the next question, we have, how will the platform for stakeholders work? So as this was our first sort of iteration of the TCC-GSR, where we had gathered many of the experts and authors and reviewers, we don't have an exact system yet, so we're still learning how to use this platform for the stakeholders. And so it'd be great to have input from you as to what you would like to see in order for, for the TCC-GSR to work for you. So please provide us any feedback for now, but when we have our next version of the report and are looking for stakeholders to contribute, again, let us know if you're interested, and this information will be provided to you in the follow-up email. So just please let us know if you're interested in being involved in the next version of the report. Sophia, I don't know if you have any input on that as well.
No, that sounds good. You covered everything I would have said too.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so are there any other questions? Okay, and again, please feel free to reach out to us at any point. If you do have any follow-up questions, again, please mark your calendars for our second webinar that will go into the interesting cases of low carbon transport actions within the different policy areas. So please keep an eye out for that information. In the meantime, here are the channels where you can find more information about SloCat and GIZ's transport work. Thank you all for joining, and thank you all for your interest and participation. And again, please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. Thank you to everyone. Have a good day.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you from my side too.